Nobody saw this coming. J.D. Vance, the sitting Vice President of the United States, has made a statement about 22AT that is now sending shockwaves through Washington. He is not entering the race. That's not a rumor. That's not a leak from an anonymous source. That's a direct statement from the man himself. And the moment it became public, the questions started flying. Why now? Why say it at all? And what does it actually mean for the future of American politics? Because this isn't just a story about one politician stepping back from one election. This is a story about what happens when one of the most carefully constructed political rises in modern American history suddenly changes direction. And to understand why this moment is so significant, you have to understand exactly how much was riding on what J.D. Vance was supposed to do next. Let's go back to the beginning. When J.D. Vance burst onto the national political scene, the narrative around him was unlike almost anything Washington had seen in years. A kid from Appalachian, Ohio, a Yale law graduate, a best-selling author who wrote honestly about poverty and dysfunction and survival. A man who seemed to bridge two worlds that American politics have been treating as permanently separate. The intellectual elite and the working class, that combination is extraordinarily rare in politics, and it generated a level of excitement that translated directly into political momentum. When he ran for Senate in Ohio, the skeptics said he couldn't win. He won. When his name started circulating as a potential vice presidential pick, the skeptics said it was too soon. It happened anyway. And when he took the oath of office as vice president, the people who had been following his trajectory from the beginning started looking forward to the next chapter, because in their minds, the vice presidency wasn't the destination. It was the launchpad. 2028 was always the implied next step, the moment when J.D. Vance would step out of the supporting role and into the lead, the moment when the story that started in Middletown, Ohio, would reach its logical conclusion. And now he's saying, that's not happening, at least not the way everyone assumed. So what changed? That's the question everyone in Washington is asking right now. And there are several theories circulating, each of them revealing something important about the current state of American politics. The first theory is the loyalty theory. Under this reading, Vance's decision is less about his own ambitions and more about the political reality of the moment he's operating in. The current administration is still very much defined by one dominant figure, and openly positioning yourself as the next in line, while that figure is still very much in the picture, is a politically dangerous move. It can be read as impatience, as disloyalty, as putting your own ambitions ahead of the team. And J.D. Vance, whatever else you say about him, has been a careful and strategic political operator. He understands optics, he understands timing. Under this theory, saying he's not running in 2028 is actually a power move disguised as a step back. It signals loyalty. It takes him out of the conversation in a way that paradoxically makes him more trusted and more valuable to the people whose trust he needs most. The second theory is the timing theory. 2028 may simply not be the right race for J.D. Vance to run. Political careers are not always linear. Sometimes the smartest move is to let one cycle pass, consolidate your position, build your record and come back stronger in a subsequent election. A sitting vice president, who runs immediately after the current administration ends, starts that race carrying the weight of every decision made during those years. Every policy that succeeded, every policy that didn't, every controversy, every moment that didn't land the way it was supposed to. That's an enormous amount of baggage to carry into a primary campaign. By stepping back from 22-8, Vance potentially gives himself the distance to eventually run on his own terms, to write his own narrative, rather than defending someone else's record. Under this theory, the announcement isn't a retreat, it's a reset. The third theory is more uncomfortable, and it's the one that a lot of political analysts are privately discussing, but not always saying out loud. The exhaustion theory. The vice presidency has not been a quiet or ceremonial role in this administration. Vance has been unusually active, unusually visible, sent into difficult situations, asked to defend complicated positions, required to perform at an exceptionally high level in an exceptionally demanding political environment. And the toll of that, while rarely discussed openly, is real. Political careers are not just strategic exercises. They are lived experiences. They involve human beings making enormous sacrifices of time, privacy, energy, and personal stability. And sometimes, people who have been moving at an extraordinary pace simply need to slow down. Whether that's what's happening with Vance is impossible to know from the outside. But the people who know him, the people in his inner circle, the people who have watched him operate up close over the past several years, are saying something interesting. They're saying he seems different lately. Not broken, not defeated, but different. More measured, more deliberate, less hungry in the way that ambitious politicians usually are when they're eyeing the next level. And that change in energy, subtle as it might seem, is being noticed by the people who pay closest attention to these things. Now let's talk about what this announcement means for everyone else, because in Washington, one person's decision not to run is another person's opportunity. The 2008 Republican field, which had been quietly organizing itself around the assumption of a Vance candidacy, suddenly looks very different. The names that had been hovering in the background, waiting to see what Vance would do, are now moving into the foreground. And the competition for the political space that Vance was expected to occupy, the young, working class, intellectually serious, economically populous lane, is now wide open. That's significant, because that lane has proven to be one of the most electorally powerful positions in modern American politics. The candidate who can authentically occupy it has a path to the nomination that doesn't depend on traditional party machinery or donor networks in the same way. Vance built that lane. In many ways, he showed it was viable. He proved the coalition existed, and now other politicians are going to try to step into it. But there's something about the authenticity of the original story, the hillbilly elegy background, the genuine working-class roots, that is very difficult to manufacture. The politicians who try to imitate it without having lived it will likely find that voters can tell the difference. But that's a challenge for them to navigate. Right now, the more immediate question is what this means for Vance himself, because stepping back from 22AT doesn't mean stepping out of politics entirely. J.D. Vance is 40 years old. Even if he serves out the full term as vice president and then takes several years away from electoral politics, he would still be young enough to run for president at a point when many of his current rivals will be past their political prime. The long game in American politics is real, and Vance has always seemed like someone playing it. Which is why the most sophisticated read of this announcement is not that it represents the end of his presidential ambitions. It represents a recalibration of the timeline, a recognition that the path to the White House is not always a straight line. That sometimes the most direct route involves a detour, a period of consolidation, a moment of strategic patience. The politicians who have tried to force their way to the top on an accelerated timeline have often found that the acceleration works against them. They arrive before the country is ready for them, before they've built the coalitions they need, before the moment that suits their particular message has fully arrived. The politicians who wait, who build, who let the moment come to them rather than chasing it, often find that the timing eventually aligns in ways they couldn't have engineered artificially. Reagan waited. Nixon came back after being written off entirely. Political history is full of examples of careers that looked finished and turned out to be anything but. Whether J.D. Vance is in that category remains to be seen, but the people dismissing this announcement as the end of his political story are almost certainly wrong. This is not an ending. It's a pause. And in politics, a well-timed pause can be the most powerful move available. There's one more dimension to this story that deserves attention: the public reaction, because the response to this announcement has been fascinating to watch. And it reveals something important about where J.D. Vance stands in the American political imagination right now. On one side, there are the people who are genuinely disappointed, the supporters who had been organizing their political hopes around a Vance candidacy, who saw him as the natural heir to a political movement that has reshaped American politics over the past decade, who believed that his particular combination of biography, intellect, and political skill made him uniquely suited for the moment. For those people, this announcement felt like a loss. Not a catastrophic one, but a real one. On the other side, there are the people who are relieved, political opponents who had been watching Vance's trajectory with concern, strategists on the other side of the aisle who had been wargaming a potential Vance candidacy and didn't love what they were seeing. People who felt that his particular combination of appeal was genuinely difficult to counter. For those people, this announcement felt like a reprieve. And then there's a third group, perhaps the most interesting one: the people who aren't sure what to make of it, who look at the announcement and see something that doesn't quite add up, who notice that the timing is unusual, who wonder what the real reason is behind the public explanation. Because in Washington, major political announcements rarely mean exactly what they say on the surface. There's almost always a layer beneath. And the question of what that layer is in this case, what the real calculation is, what the full context includes that the public statement doesn't, is the question that political watchers are going to be picking apart for weeks. Whatever the answer turns out to be, one thing is clear: the 2028 race just changed. The political landscape just shifted. And J.D. Vance, whatever comes next for him, just made a decision that will be talked about for a very long time. Not because it closes a chapter, but because it opens a question. A question about timing, about strategy, about what this particular political figure is actually building toward. And that question, hanging open and unanswered, may turn out to be more powerful than any campaign announcement could ever be. Because in politics, the most dangerous person in the room is often not the one who is loudly chasing the prize. It's the one who just quietly stepped back and said not yet, But let's not move past the immediate consequences too quickly, because there are real practical effects of this announcement that are already playing out in real time. Donor networks are shifting. The people who had been quietly holding their financial commitments in anticipation of a Vance 2028 campaign are now making new calculations. Some will redirect their resources to other candidates immediately. Others will wait and watch, hoping for clarification, hoping for a reversal, hoping that the announcement turns out to mean something different than it appears. That donor uncertainty creates a kind of vacuum, and political vacuums in Washington get filled very quickly. The candidates who move fastest to fill that vacuum, to capture the attention and the resources that had been orbiting around a potential Vance candidacy, will have a significant early advantage, and the race to fill that vacuum has almost certainly already begun behind closed doors. Staffers are making calls, consultants are changing their availability calendars. The invisible machinery of American presidential politics is already in motion, and all of it is moving faster because of what J.D. Vance said. There's also the question of what this means for the Republican Party more broadly. The party has been going through a significant transformation over the past several years. The old establishment lanes, the donor class candidates, the traditional foreign policy hawks, the Chamber of Commerce Republicans have all been under pressure from a more populist, more economically nationalist direction. Vance was, in many ways, the intellectual architect of that newer direction. Not just a politician representing it, but a thinker who gave it coherence and vocabulary and a compelling personal story. Without him in the 2028 race, the question of who carries that intellectual framework forward becomes genuinely open. There are politicians who have tried to adopt the aesthetic of that populist nationalism, who have learned the language and the positioning. But adopting a framework is not the same as having built it, and the Republican primary voters who are most aligned with that direction are sophisticated enough to tell the difference between the original and the imitation. Which means the 2008 Republican primary could end up being partly a debate about authenticity, about who genuinely represents the direction the party has been moving in versus who is performing that representation for strategic reasons. That's a fascinating and genuinely unpredictable dynamic. And it exists entirely because of the announcement that J.D. Vance just made. On the Democratic side, the reaction is equally revealing. The strategists and operatives who had been preparing their 2028 candidate for a potential matchup against Vance are now recalibrating. The opposition research that had been compiled, the messaging frameworks that had been developed, the debate preparation that had been done with a Vance candidacy in mind, all of it now needs to be rethought. That's not a small undertaking, and it creates uncertainty on a side of the aisle that was already dealing with significant questions about its own direction and its own candidate recruitment. In some ways, Vance stepping back creates almost as many complications for his opponents as it does for his allies, because the unknown replacement is always harder to prepare for than the known opponent. You can game plan against a specific person. You know their record, their weaknesses, their debating style, their vulnerabilities. You can't game plan against an empty slot, and right now, the 2028 Republican field is an empty slot where J.D. Vance used to be. Let's come back one more time to the man at the center of all of this. Because beneath all the political strategy and the donor calculations, and the party dynamics, there is a human being who just made a significant decision about his own future. And whatever the strategic logic behind it, whatever the calculations that went into it, it is worth acknowledging that these decisions are not made lightly. Political careers at this level consume everything. They consume time and privacy and relationships, and personal identity in ways that are difficult to explain to people who haven't experienced them. And the decision to step back, even temporarily, even strategically, requires a kind of courage that doesn't always get recognized. It's easy to stay in the race. It's easy to keep running toward the prize. The momentum of ambition carries you forward almost automatically. Stopping takes something different. Whatever J.D. Vance's reasons, whatever the full context behind this announcement, the decision to say not now, to resist the pull of an opportunity that was seemingly right in front of him, is not a small thing. It tells you something about where he is, what he's thinking, what he values. And it raises the possibility that the version of J.D. Vance who eventually does enter a presidential race, if that day comes, will be a different and perhaps more formidable version than the one who would have run in 2028. More seasoned, more certain, more deliberate. The best version of a political figure often isn't the version that runs the first time the opportunity presents itself. It's the version that waits until the moment is exactly right. Whether J.D. Vance is making that calculation consciously or not, whether this announcement is the result of deep strategic thinking or something more personal, the effect may end up being the same. A pause, a reset. And eventually, when the timing is right and the moment has arrived and the country is ready for what he has to offer, a return. Or not. Because politics doesn't always follow the script we write for it. Careers that seemed destined for greatness have ended quietly. Figures who seemed finished have come back stronger than ever. The story of American politics is full of both. Which story this turns out to be, nobody knows yet. What we know is what was announced today. J.D. Vance is not entering the 2028 race. Washington is already adjusting, and the question of what comes next for him and for everyone else is now wide open. That's the story as it stands. And it is very far from finished.